I'm involved. You may have heard of it. There's a group in America they call themselves Exponential, and their idea is exponential growth through multiplying the church. And they came out with a book that's actually free. You can get it online. If you go to exponential.org, you can download it for free. And it's about the 5 stages of church growth. And they're kind of theoretical in the way that they're writing, and I've been sort of into it and lived through it. And so I think some of what they're doing is a little too clean and sterile. And in fact, that's where I'm going from here, is to meet with them, and they want to modify their message, their primary message. But they gathered in April, they gathered 5,500 potential church planters. It's the biggest thing of its kind that's ever happened in America. And the reason it was 5,500 is that's all they could hold in the building. And then in October they're doing another one, and it's going to be in Newport Beach, California, and they'll hold 2,500 there. And so there's hope for America in that this movement is getting going. And so I feel real fortunate. I got invited to come in and speak into the way that they're trying to develop this whole thing. But we have a church in Japan, and the guy is one of these people. You know that there's no gift of charisma in the Bible. You know, we talk about John Kennedy was a charismatic individual. Okay, that's a secular way of saying he glowed in the dark. You know, Michael Jordan would be one of those kind of guys that everything he does, it's bigger than life. Bono is like that. I think John Lennon was like that. Hillary Clinton isn't. Donald Trump isn't. You know, but you see these people who they just, everything they do, it just turns to gold, and people want to follow them. And so I have this pastor friend in Japan, and he is struggling because he wants to plant churches. His congregation is 11 years old. They meet in a ballet studio. It's kind of weird because in ballet, you want to see yourself and what you're doing, right? And so there's mirrors. The whole wall is mirrors. It's very freaky to be in that room. And for several years, I've been after him. The church is about 110 people, which is huge in Japan. Average church in Japan is 27 people. And so they did this, and so we've been after him to start another service. Because he has the place for like 5 or 6 hours on Sunday morning. They're only on one service. He started a second service. It filled to standing room only in 2 weeks. And so now we're ragging on him to start a third service. He goes, it's just more work. And so, see, part of the problem is he uses the same worship team in both services. So we'll start a service with one guy, and then people will volunteer and help. I'll start a service, and I'll put a couple of offering plates down on the floor, and then I'll go, I just did this when we started our 8 o'clock service. I don't say I forgot, because I didn't forget. I'm calculating. I go, you know, I never asked anybody to help usher. Would somebody, there's an offering plate, and boom, somebody jumps in there. One time they banged heads jumping for the offering plate. But afterwards I go, would you mind doing that every week? Got ushers. You get a little baby that starts making a little bit of noise that some young mother brought to church. There's bound to be a grandmother in that group that will say, here, let me hold your child. And then I go, and afterwards I ask her, would you do that for us every week? I'll take church bulletins and put them on a little table right by the door, and then I just, somebody will pick them up and start handing them out. I go, ask, will you do that every week? And is this helpful? Yes. So we've started church always small and then grew it large. I know there's a theory now, Hillsong is preaching this, if you can't start big, don't start at all. Well, I really disagree with that. But I'll do a thing, let's say this is a wall right here, and we're in this room, and it can hold like, 65 people. And so I'm only going to have maybe 6 or 8 people show up. And that means this room is huge. It might as well hold 2,000 people as to hold 60 people. It's just way too big. So I'll put a chair here, And 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 chairs. So now we got 6. And put 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We got 12 chairs. And we got a stack in case 20 people come. We got a stack of chairs there. But what's happened is that everybody has their back to the big empty space. And they're facing the little tiny space. And so I just made a really big room, really small. And then we just kind of grow out from there. We started, when I was still in California, the Friday night, Sunday morning service became the biggest service in the church. But we started exactly that way. In a room that was about maybe 3 times the size of this room, and we started with less than 12 people, and then it grew to where it was our biggest service. So we've done this over and over again. So, but my friend Fumi is his name, Fumizaki Chito. Fumi is kind of a Superman. He can do anything. He can do it really well. He's a great rock musician. He led worship in the biggest church that we started in Japan, and they just rocked the house. It was incredible. He's a great preacher. He wants to start churches. And I'm going to show you some process stuff that I did for him, and it'll apply to you, and I'm going to ask you to talk to each other about it in a minute. But I want to tell you this story of Fumi. He had me there a couple of years ago. I go there once a year, and he had me there to do a seminar on church multiplication, much like we did last year here. And nothing happened. And so then he figured out, you got to make disciples into leaders before you can send people out to plant churches. So would I come and do a seminar on how to make disciples? And so I did that in April. And it was really exciting to me because afterwards, 2 guys came to me, and they're involved in the church pretty heavily, and they want to go out and plant a church, and they're doing the right thing. They're in a church now that's got about 300 people on Sunday morning. They'll stay there on Sunday morning, keep their families there, and then they go out into another town and they'll start a house church. There is no risk at all. If it fails, they just keep coming back to church like they always did. There's no financial investment. There's no money to lose. There's nothing but maybe a bruised ego if it didn't come out as well as you wanted to. No risk at all. So I go to my friend and I tell him about this, and he tells me why both guys are not qualified to do the ministry. And so nothing happened. I look at him and I think, wow. He looks at him and he can tell you all the flaws in the people. And sometimes, you know what? You guys do the same thing. This is your biggest problem. You disqualify people instead of qualifying people. You know, if I have a spiritual gift, it's a gift of encouragement. I can look at somebody and go, you can too. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you can. And I can help people to do more than they ever thought they could do before. And to me, that's really where we're getting all these leaders from. So he was all frustrated after I left. And so he wanted me to come back. I went back in May to be with some other churches. And he goes, can I have like 2 hours of just on a Saturday morning? Well, we ended up talking for 4 hours. And I know you guys are into cricket, right? In America, we played baseball. And it's a little different. And in baseball, you know how it works. There's 4 bases. And if you hit the ball out of the park or something, you get a home run. That means you go all 4 bases. And so we started talking about, there's a guy named Reggie Jackson, who was a really famous baseball player. And he played for the New York Yankees. And while he was playing, they won more World Series than anybody. Kind of weird when they basically only play baseball in America, and then you go, we're the world champions, right? We do that in American football too. The Super Bowl winner is the world champion, but nobody else plays American football. But anyhow, Reggie Jackson won more World Series for the New York Yankees than anybody by hitting home runs. And the World Series is always in October, so he was called Mr. October. And the other thing you need to know about Reggie Jackson is you know what it means to strike out? You swing the bat and you miss 3 times and now you're out. He's the strikeout king of all time. Reggie Jackson struck out more times than anybody in the history of baseball. including Babe Ruth. And the point that we were talking about, as we were talking to Fumi, is if you don't swing the bat, you're not going to get a home run. You're not going to get anything. You got to take risks with these people. And let me get rid of that. So we're talking about this home run thing, and there was another guy from our church that was with me, and he pipes up and he says, "Yeah, but you know that home runs are useless if you don't have a lot of base hits. Base hit means that you didn't hit the ball very hard, but it was enough to get on base." And it's true. In a baseball team, you're going to have a couple of guys that can hit home runs, but you're mostly going to have guys that can hit what we call a single, they get to first base, or a double, they get to second base. Sometimes they get to a triple. If you don't have base hits, because when the home run hitter comes, I mean, suppose what we call the bases are loaded. There's one guy standing on each base, and then a guy hits a home run. Now you got 4 runs. You got four scores. Am I making sense? So, but without those base hit guys, who are never going to be famous, the famous guy is useless. In fact, when Michael Jordan first started playing for the Chicago Bulls in basketball, he was the star. I mean, that guy was, you know, if you ever watched him play basketball, it was magical. And he was just going for it. He was scoring more points than anybody in the NBA. And they never won a championship. It's when he settled back down and matured enough that he became a team player and he started feeding other people the ball, that now nobody can defend against him because everybody is capable of scoring, not just Michael Jordan. And so we're talking about this, and this guy says, you know what, if you don't have base hits, you're not going to win baseball games. And Fumi got it. He really got it. And so I go, Fumi, you're a home run hitter. And I forced him. Japanese people are humble, right? I go, you have to admit you're a home run hitter. There's not a lot of Fumichitos in Japan. And so I pressed him. I go, tell me that you know, say I am a home run hitter. And so it was hard, but he said that. And I go, no, but here's your problem. You don't want to start a church with anybody but a home run hitter. And so you don't take a risk on people. And what you really need to do is look for the base hit guys. Not the guys who can fill up a service of 110 people in 2 weeks. You want to look at the guys that start out with 8 people and it slowly grows to 25. And that's how we're going to win Japan to the Lord. And right away, every time that we get together, Fumi's always got a yellow pad, and he's like my wife, you know. He's a pen and pad. And so he draws numbers 1 to 10. And he puts a square for a home run hitter, and then he puts a 0 for somebody who strikes out. And then he puts a 1 or a 2 all the way up for the base hitters. And I go, the only thing wrong with that chart is that you're going to have at least 2 strikeouts. And you got to plan for that. You got to expect that there's going to be people who strike out. And you got to aim not for the home run hitter. That's something that just happens. You got to aim for the base hitters, and every so often, see, Guy Capelliella looked like a base hitter. The guy I talked to you about last night. It turned out he could hit home runs. Nobody knew, nobody had any idea, and then poof, you know, there it happened. That's really the way it works. So, are you following with me? Yeah. So we're looking for base hitters when we're thinking about planting churches. We're not looking for home run hitters. We are going to accept the fact that sometimes we're going to go out and we're going to do a church plant, and the guy's going to strike out, and it's just going to fail. And our job is to make sure that he doesn't get wounded in the process, because that can be a painful thing. You don't want people to come out and feel rejected. This is my problem with Bible colleges and seminaries. They take people who are not leaders, who feel a call from God in their life to serve, and they make a promise. They don't say it out loud, but they make a promise just by being there, that if you come here for 4 years, you will be a leader when you leave, because we're going to call you a pastor, and we're going to give you a license. And I believe that if somebody's a leader, there's a fail-safe way of knowing who's a leader. they got a follower. If they don't have a follower, they're not a leader. And so they could be a rebellious leader. And, you know, I like to work with rebellious leaders. You know, I'll get up and get a hold of them, and, you know, I always put my arm around their shoulder or get my hand on them some way so they can't get away. And I'll go, you know what, when you said that in that meeting, that was absolutely unacceptable behavior. And I go, I'm here to tell you that's forbidden. You have to make a choice. If you're going to be in this church, you're not going to act like that anymore. And I need you to make that choice right now. And I do this in 30 seconds. And then usually they're, you know, and sometimes I'll call them an idiot or something. I'll say something that shocks them a little bit. And actually I have some worse words than that, but I won't tell you. But anyhow, I get their attention. And then after they agree that they're going to change, I go, look, God called me to do something. And He brought you into my life. And just stands to reason, I can't do what God called me to do without you. You are hugely important to this team. Yeah. You have great leadership ability. That's how come you cause so much trouble. And I need you to accomplish whatever God's called me to do. And if we can do it in partnership, we're going places. And then I'll kind of slap on the shoulder and go, so what do you think about that? And oftentimes, the guy who's been 10 minutes before rebellious has got tears in his eyes. And so we're going places. And so I want to look for people who already are leaders. I want to work with them. But I want to keep working with them so that if something goes wrong and they fail and they do strike out, that I'm still there for them and I'm still there to encourage them and to lift them. Am I making sense? Yeah. And now, having said all of that as a backdrop, this is a presentation that I did in Fumi's church. And I want you to see that Fumi's church, they started with about 40 people, which is pretty big for a church plant in Great Britain. And they immediately struggled financially because when you got 40 people, you got to rent a room like this, right? And so you're in financial difficulties. If you start in a home, you have no financial problems at all. In fact, you know, in America, I don't know what you do here, but in America, any money we donate to a church, we don't have to pay taxes on. So the church has to keep tax records and all that. And so then to do that, you have to make a corporation, and to do that, then suddenly you can be sued because the corporation exists. A lawyer can sue you for something. So then you have to buy insurance. It becomes very, very complicated. So I was talking to one of my friends who is a house church pastor, and I go, how do you handle money? Because the thing in Las Vegas, we're trying to figure out how, you know, we gave them $2,000 to go hire an attorney to make the corporation, and they wouldn't do it. They didn't want to be bothered with it. So I went to this guy who's been running a house church for 14 years in Honolulu, and I go, how do you handle money? He goes, well, we teach people to tithe for one thing. We teach it really strongly. But we tell them, don't bring your tithe here, we don't want it. And he goes, I fund the whole house church out of my own tithe. He's an engineer. And he goes, but basically, you know what that means? I buy coffee and styrofoam cups. And then the rest of it, I give away to a missionary. And so he goes, we teach everybody tithe, but give it away to some mission that you believe in, or give it away to somebody who's hurting in the community or hurting in the church, and we just don't bother with the tax receipts. You're giving it to God. You don't care if you get, you know, God doesn't need a tax deduction. And so it's like they're free. So watch me now having said that and showing you these slides. So 5 stages of church life. The first one we're going to call survival. The second one, fame. The third one, kingdom of God. These are the priorities. Our priority is to exist 6 months from now. Over here, our priority is for the pastor to become a big shot. I'm famous. Over here, the priority is to build the kingdom of God. Okay? Now, you start out, you got 40 people, and you got to rent a building. You got financial problems right from the get-go. You're struggling. And so you're thinking scarcity thoughts. You're always thinking about how can we save money, how can we keep from spending. Those are the kinds of things that you're thinking about. Then there's an overlap period of time. Then you get to where you're thriving. So now this church that was 40 people is now got 110 people, and they're able to meet their financial obligations and whatever. And then with Fumi, I'll get into this later and show you more, but he moved to the adding place. Remember we're talking about adding versus multiplying? He moved to where suddenly there's 225, 230 people coming to church. We're trying to get him to do a third service, so there'll be 300 and some people. And the reason that we're trying to press him that way is we want him to have money that he can invest in this over here. So in here, you're thinking about scarcity. You don't have enough leaders, you don't have enough money, you don't have enough of anything. You just want to survive. Over here, you're thriving. Things are really good. Everybody's happy. Everybody's healthy. There's enough money, and you're thinking about growing larger. Over here, you're thinking about becoming a mega church, and that's what people do. Then usually that's the end of it. People stop right there. All they want to do is just get big for the sake of getting big, and for bragging rights. Am I making sense? Yeah. Okay, then this again, I stole this from these other people. They saw this and I did it. You move toward reproducing. And now you're thinking thoughts about becoming a movement. And so you don't care so much about how many people go to my church. You care about how many people are going to church around the world because my church exists. And now you're thinking about movement. And you're thinking, instead of building your kingdom, you're thinking about building God's kingdom. Am I making sense? Yeah. Any questions about this? Okay. So here's Hope Chapel in Southern California in the 1970s. Okay. We struggled when we started out. We got a free church building. We had to paint it. It was pink, like she said. Everything was pink. The outside was pink, the inside was pink, all except for the nursery, which was lavender. And that meant that only women are going to be comfortable in that church. And so just doing that was a big deal. Getting money to go out and hand out literature in the neighborhoods, we just didn't have money. The only money that we really had to start with was my own personal savings. I'd saved up enough money to make a down payment on a house. And then we went through it in about 2 months. And we got to the point where one Monday, we went to the bank and we took all of the money out of our savings account and we put it in the checking account and we wrote checks to pay our bills. And we had enough money left over to buy our 2 children an ice cream cone each. And we didn't have enough money to buy ourselves an ice cream cone. And I went home and I was laying on the bed that night. I had some people coming over to my house for a meeting, and I was in despair. And I laid there and I was planning on asking my dad, can I move home from California to Oregon and live in your basement with my family, and I'll get a job selling used cars? Because again, I told you yesterday, when I came up in the ministry, we didn't have the term bivocational. And I was taught in Bible college that if you have to get a secular job, you're a failure. And so if I'm a failure, I'm just going to be a failure all the way, and I'm going to quit being a pastor, and I'm going to go do this other thing. That was the education that I had. And so I was laying there thinking about that, and the Lord spoke to me. And I've had this happen about 3 times in my life. I don't like it. I mean, I like it when the Holy Spirit speaks to my heart. But I've had several times where, and once I was with a friend, and he didn't hear it, so I know it wasn't really out loud, but I heard it as though there was somebody right here talking to me in my ear and talking out loud. And that's how it hurt. It wasn't that they were over here, it's that they were over here. And once I saw a vision, and I don't like seeing visions because these things are disruptive. If God has to show you a vision, it means He's yelling at you because you're not paying attention. And so I don't want to hear it. I don't want another vision in my life because I like my life just the way it is right now. Thank you. So anyway, I'm laying there feeling miserable, and I hear the Lord speak to me, and he says, and it's from the King James Version of the Bible, Paul says in Philippians, I've learned to abase, which means to be poor, and I've learned to abound, which means to have adequate resources. And the Spirit speaks to me and says, I've taught you to abase. In other words, God made me poor. Now I'm going to teach you to abound, which means God's going to supply adequate resources. See, I'm in this mode right there, struggling to survive. And that was on a Monday. On Wednesday, I went to a Bible college and I taught a class for them. And it was quite a distance for me to drive, and I thought they would at least give me money for gasoline. And they didn't. And so, I mean, all I have is the gas in my tank. And our church offerings are a bunch of hippies, right? They went from selling dope to make, you know what sand candles are? Sand candles are where you scoop out some sand, like you get a box, you go to the beach, you get a bunch of sand, and then you scoop out a weird shape in it, and then you pour colored wax in there and you stick string in it to make thing, and you sell it at the swap meet. And that was the main industry of our church for a while. And so I would take home the lowest amount for a week's salary was $15. My rent was $225 a month in those days. This is like 50 years ago, 40 years ago. So I was really scared. And I go to this Bible college and I have to drive, 45 minutes to get there and 45 minutes to come home, plus the time that I'm there. And you'd think they would give me $20 or at least give me $5 for gas. Nothing. And so I came home just depressed. And my wife leans across the balcony of our apartment and says, we got a surprise in the mail. And I go, how much? Because the Lord had spoken to me on Monday night. There were 2 checks that came in. One, a guy he got me into a stupid investment. He believed in it. He went and got a whole bunch of young people to invest their money in this thing. It promised to earn 17% interest, and it was a scam. And he lost money, and we all lost money, and we couldn't afford it because we were all young kids. And he was trying to do us a favor. That guy went out, and God bless his business, he paid us all back the money at 17% interest. That check came in the mail that day. I go to the church that afternoon. There's a check from a guy who doesn't go to our church. He's not a Christian. His kids go to our church. And he sends us a check for like $240. It's more than my month's rent. It was just, it had to be God talking about that money. Making sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that's my experience. Okay. If I would have been in a house church, it would have been a problem. I would have had a job. I could have covered the rent. There would be no struggling at all. We'd start out thriving. Are you with me in this?
Yep.
So, we had moved within a couple of years to a point where we were thriving. There's maybe 150 people coming, 125 people coming to church. Things are going pretty well. And then there were some young people in our church, young families. They lived about 7 miles away, and there was no motorway. They had to drive on surface streets. And this was when you went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night at the church building. We didn't do mini church yet. And so they had small children. They'd come to church on Sunday morning. They loved it. But to come back again on Sunday night and then get their kids to bed, it was hard for them. So they said, could we have Sunday night church in a house in our neighborhood? And so we sent a guy named Richard Agosino down there to become the Sunday night preacher in this thing. And within a couple of months, he comes back to me and says, they want to become their own church. And I go, you can't do that. Because we're Foursquare, and Foursquare has rules. You got to have graduated from Bible college. You didn't. They had a rule in those days, you can't have 2 Foursquare churches in one town. And the town of Torrance, California already had 2. And now we're going to add a 3rd one. No, you can't do this. And then besides that, he wanted to call it Branch of Hope. And I thought people are going to think I'm trying to start a hope denomination. And so I told him no. And then there's a group called the Navigators. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they a few months later, because he just cooperated, I won't do it. And then the Navigators tried to recruit him to become a missionary to New Zealand. Well, in Foursquare, I always grew up knowing that it's harder to be a missionary than a pastor. And so you got to have some pastoral experience before they'll let you be a missionary. And I'm thinking, these guys think he's good enough to be a missionary. Why don't I think he's good enough to be a pastor? And so I went and told them, let's go for it. And so they started Branch of Hope. And then I went to my Foursquare supervisor, and I had to tell him what we did. And so I, being the crafty fellow that I am, I went to him and I go, I need to talk to you about something. Well, what? Because now, I'm starting to hem and haw, and he's starting to worry that I'm committing adultery or something. So I go, there's something that we did, and maybe it's bad. We might have done something wrong. What'd you do? Well, we didn't try to do anything wrong. We tried to do something that was right, but it doesn't fit with the bylaws. Well, what did you do? And I kept doing this for like 5 minutes. And so I got to a point where he's just dying to know what the heck we did. And so I go, we started a church with a guy who didn't go to Bible college. There's already 2 churches in the town, and they're not going to call it Torrance Foursquare Church number 3. It's going to be called the Branch of Hope. And he, what he said to me? And this guy was kind of a legalist. He turns to me and says, my daughter is 20 years old. I'm hoping that she gets married. I'm hoping that she has children. I want to have grandchildren. But I can't tell her who to marry. I can't tell her where to have children or when to have them. And I can't tell her what to name her children. And he goes, your church just gave birth, and all I can do is rejoice.
That's right.
That was good, huh?
Yeah, that was good.
Watch. We went from thriving right past adding to where we begin to be a reproducing church.
Wow.
And actually, this chart is wrong. I realized this afterwards because I didn't get this. Richard got it. I didn't get this. But Richard, see, we kept reproducing after that. I told you I was the 30th guy to leave our church to plant churches. We weren't thinking of multiplying. We were only thinking of we'll start churches. We never thought of we'll start churches and they'll start churches. But actually that first church, within the first few years, they started 4 more churches. So they actually took us from here to here, and I was too stupid to realize it. Even 40 some odd years later, when I made this chart in April of this year, I still hadn't figured that out. Okay, so now Hope Chapel Honolulu, we kind of started out thriving. We started church on the beach, but we had a lot of money behind us from the people in California, and so we were able to run radio ads. And so when we had church on the beach, the first week, 70 some odd people showed up, and so there was, it's adequate money. So we went from thriving, but God had spoken to us and given us a goal, and we knew it was from God. And the goal was that we were to take, now at this time, 4% of the people in Hawaii go to church, okay, or call themselves Christians, including Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. The Lord spoke to us and said, your deal is you got to start enough churches or help other people start them that in 10 years you reach 1% of the population of Hawaii in your churches. So at that time there was 1 million people in Hawaii. That meant that we were going to start enough churches that would reach 10,000 people. And so we knew it wouldn't happen this way because things are messy. Always, life is messy. But we told everybody, well, the easy way to think about that is we're just going to start 100 churches with 100 people in them. That's 10,000 people. Well, we didn't make the goal. It took us 11 years instead of 10. But we got 1%. So if you think about it, you got 4% of the population. You add 1%, the church population just grew by 25%. So that was a pretty huge thing. So we went to Hawaii on day 1 knowing that we have to become a multiplying church. So we started out as a stage 2 church, and But we weren't just a stage 2 church. We already were stage 5 church in our brains. And within 6 months, we'd launched one church, and within a year, we'd launched a second church, and we were off to the races. By now, there's 50-some churches in Hawaii alone from that one church, and then whatever else we've done around the world has gone from there. Am I making headway here? Okay. So I call this movement thoughts. You're starting to think movement thoughts from either you're struggling to survive, and you probably, if you're struggling to survive, you got to struggle to survive. You just got to get from there to there. But if you're at this point, if you can resist this, because I think this is temptation, and I think it's temptation from the devil. I think addition will happen. If something good is happening, people are going to be drawn to it. Addition will happen. But who builds the church? Jesus. Right. So if I have friends that have bogged down here and they forgot about letting Jesus build the church. They're building the church. And they're working their brains out to build the church. And they're trying to become famous. And there's no other way of saying it than they're trying to become famous. And there's something that's clearly sinful about that. And if they're watching me on Facebook, they're mad at me already. But what am I getting at is you. You. I want you to identify where you're at in this, and I want you to understand that to go from here to here, or from here to here, or from here all the way over to here, is a choice that you make. And as the senior leader of your church, or the senior leadership team of your church, you are making that choice. And you may not have thought about it, but you made it. You made the choice. What I showed you this morning, the 20-year goals for our church, see, what we have done is we have said we are going to be a multiplying church. And long after Pastor Ralph is in the grave, we're going to be a multiplying church. And the reason we've written that document is that we're going to brainwash everybody with it, that we're going to do what Jesus said, and to go and make disciples of all the nations. That we decided to do it. And you know, I don't know if I'm making sense to you or not, but if you just don't decide, you kind of decided not to do something. If you decide to do something and go, I am going to do it, well, then you may not get all the way there. You may strike out, or you may hit a double and get to second base and not hit a home run. But if you aim for the main goal, it's a good chance you're going to get there. If you don't aim for it, then for sure you're not going to get there. Do you know? Do you guys ever do ice hockey in England? No?
Some of us do.
Some do. Do you know who Wayne Gretzky is?
Yes.
Wayne Gretzky is probably the most famous ice hockey player in history. And just a really nice guy. But Gretzky said something once that was really important. He said, 100% of the shots you don't take never go in the net. Think about that. 100% of the shots you don't take don't go in the net. Because you never slap the puck toward the net. It can't go in the net.
Yeah.
And so if we don't sit around and go, well, I'm going to try and multiply, then we're not going to multiply. It's not going to happen. And so we need to begin to think along these lines. So Crossroads Church today, my friend Fumi, he's fighting this. He doesn't want fame. He wants this. His struggle is that he's been looking for home run hitters, and that's held him up right here. But when we talked 2 months ago, and he realized I need to look for base hit guys, then all of a sudden he's got the ability to get to here almost immediately, because he's got these 2 guys in the church, and he can send them out 4:30 on Sunday afternoon, have a potluck, and have house church, and suddenly he's doing this. And then if he begins to coach them the whole idea of multiplying is we reproduce and then they reproduce. And so we begin to be a movement. So Fumi is right here, and he's been struggling to get out of this. And I think when we had our baseball talk, it pushed him over to where he's going to do this. So Crossroads Church, their next step is building disciple-making tools. That they need to begin to do what they've got to do to ready the people that they think are ready to go out and plant the church. And so, again, I'm using Crossroads as an example. So building disciple-making tools. How can we get 50% of our members into discipleship groups? And I'm asking that question of you. How can you get 50% of your members, if they're not there already, into some kind of discipleship group? How can you then disciple members as leaders? And how can you disciple leaders into potential church planters? Those are the issues that we have to deal with if we're going to turn our church into a movement. Now, here's what I don't think you have to do. I think if you have a house church of 12 people, I don't think you have to grow to 200 before you start to think about being a movement. We have house church movements in America. A friend of mine named Neil Cole used to come and follow me around to seminars like this. And I didn't know him. All I knew was that I saw him in Los Angeles, and then I was in San Diego, and he shows up again. And then I'm in Maui, and he shows up again. And I'm in Seattle, Washington, and he shows up again, and I think the guy's a stalker. I really did. And so I went up to him, and I go, "What are you doing here?" And I was angry. It's like, "Why are you following me around?" I say the same thing everywhere I go. I'm teaching the same seminar, and you keep coming. What are you doing here? And he started laughing at me, and he goes, he goes, I'm buying into what you have to say. He goes, "But your numbers are all wrong." I go, "Well, what?" And he goes, "Just come to lunch." I brought 11 people here with me. From Long Beach, California to Seattle, he brought 11 people. And he goes, "Come to lunch with us. I want you to meet my team, and then I'll talk to you about numbers." And so we get out, and I was pastoring a church of probably like 1,500 people at the time, and we got all these mini churches going on, and we've been planting churches. And so we get with Neil, and he goes, "Here's where your numbers are wrong." He goes, a church should never get over 35 people. It should always meet in a home. See, in California, they got bigger houses, right? And so it should always meet in a house. And once you get 35 people, then at least 5 of them need to leave and go start a new church. And he goes, "What you call mini church, you thinking 10, 12 people in a mini church. I'm thinking 2 or 3. In fact, he's actually codified it. He wrote a book about this, that they get together, 2 guys can get together and talk about the word and pray and whatever. And then a 3rd one joins, then now there's 3. But as soon as a 4th guy joins them, they got 2 weeks to be together, and they got to split into 2 groups of 2. So they're talking about multiplication, you get 35 people, you got 2 weeks, and 5 are leaving at least. Maybe 17 leave, but they start multiplying. They started 1,000 house churches in 1 year.
Wow.
He was pastoring 110 people and frustrated. He latched onto what I was doing, but then he began to think about it more in biblical terms than Western and American terms. Yeah. And he started thinking that what they did was a lot smaller other than the church in Jerusalem. And so they've had all this success. He told me a story. Neil Cole, you got to read this guy. He's become a very famous author now. Because of what he's done. But Neil told me that one time he was in East Los Angeles. East Los Angeles is a pretty rough neighborhood. There's a lot of gangs, a lot of drugs. And he was doing one of their churches in East LA, and they hold their services on Tuesday nights in homes. And so he noticed that down the street, about a half a block, there were a bunch of people lugging Bibles into a house every Tuesday night. And so he's there doing his thing, and they're called Awakening Chapels, these churches. And so Neil says he sees people there with Bibles, and so he just wandered down the street one Tuesday night and introduced himself and just You said, hey, I'm a Christian. I see you guys got Bibles. What are you doing? And they go, oh, we're part of a movement of churches called Awakening Chapels. It was started by this guy named Neil Cole. And they tell him they're so excited about the whole thing, and he's Neil Cole. and this is the way it should be. They don't know him. They don't know what he looks like. They don't know from nothing. And get this, he's the leader of the movement, and he didn't know they existed. That's a movement. That's a movement. And so I think that Neil has a better chance of evangelizing America than I do. Because Neil can start churches like that, and he can get into nooks and crannies and dangerous neighborhoods. It's hard for me, living in Hawaii, to actually send people to the U.S. mainland. I can send them to Japan, and I know they're going to thrive. If I send them to the U.S. mainland, it's hard. Hawaii's a little different culture, and the U.S. mainland is a harder place. For sure, nobody from my church is going to East Los Angeles. They're going to be too scared to go there. But Neil, because of the way that he does it, and you just, you start a half mile from where you started, and then you go another half mile and another half mile, somebody's bound to end up in East Los Angeles, and it's just the way that it works. So that's movement thinking. Are you with me? Okay, so I want you to turn and talk to each other, and I want you to answer these questions for each other. What can you do in your situation? Not what is Ralph's wonderful model, but what can you do in your situation to get 50% of your people into some kind of discipleship? How can you then disciple your members as leaders? And then who do you have that you think might be a potential church planter? And how can you turn them into one? Turn around and make groups of 3 or 4 people so that there's a little momentum here. And I'm going to give you about a half an hour to talk about this stuff. So go for it.